Several people have reportedly been killed during protests in Iran as demonstrations erupt across the country over worsening economic conditions. According to Iranian media outlets and human rights groups, the unrest reflects growing public anger over inflation, currency collapse, and long-standing economic pressure. On January 1st, Iranian state-linked media acknowledged multiple fatalities. The Fars news agency reported that at least 3 protesters were killed and 17 others were injured during an attack on a police station in Iran's western province of Loristan. The incident marked a sharp escalation in demonstrations that have been spreading across several regions. According to Fars, protesters entered the police headquarters around 6 p.m. local time. Clashes followed between demonstrators and security forces, during which several police vehicles were set on fire. Authorities described the events as riots, while protesters described them as acts of desperation. One demonstrator told local media, "Refrigerators are empty, pockets are empty. Every day people see themselves becoming poorer." This statement has since become a recurring phrase across Iranian coverage, capturing the economic frustration felt by many citizens. The protests are being described as the most significant since 2022, when nationwide unrest erupted following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini while in police custody. That wave of demonstrations centered on women's rights and government authority. This time, however, the driving force appears to be economic survival. The demonstrations began on December 28th, when shopkeepers and merchants reportedly took to the streets in response to a rapid decline in Iran's currency and rising prices of basic goods. Since then, clashes between protesters and security forces have intensified. Iran's economy has been under extreme pressure. Inflation officially reached 42.5% in December 2025, while the Iranian rial lost approximately half of its value against the US dollar over the course of the year. For many Iranians, wages have failed to keep up with the rising cost of food, fuel, and housing. In the city of Lordagan, located in the Chahar Mahal and Bakhtiari province, both Fars news agency and the Kurdish rights group Hangau reported multiple deaths linked to protests. Meanwhile, in the western city of Kudasht, authorities confirmed at least 1 fatality. Hangau also reported another death in Iran's central province of Isfahan. The exact circumstances surrounding many of these deaths remain unclear. Iranian state media has provided limited details, while independent verification is difficult due to restricted access for foreign journalists and internet disruptions. On December 31st, a separate demonstration reportedly resulted in the death of a 21-year-old volunteer member of Iran's paramilitary besieged force, which operates under the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. State-run IRNA confirmed the death, while the student news network blamed demonstrators, citing comments from a deputy governor in Loristan province. Iranian authorities maintain that security forces are responding to unrest caused by violent actors. Protesters, however, argue that economic collapse leaves them with no alternative but to demonstrate. In response to the unrest, government spokesperson Fatima Mojaharani stated on January 1st that authorities would engage in direct dialogue with representatives of trade unions and merchants. Whether these talks will lead to tangible economic relief remains uncertain. Iran's clerical leadership faces mounting pressure on multiple fronts. Western sanctions continue to restrict trade and financial access, severely limiting economic recovery. At the same time, military strikes carried out in June 2025 by Israel and the United States targeted Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure, as well as senior military leadership, further straining state resources. While officials often point to foreign pressure as the primary cause of economic hardship, critics argue that internal mismanagement, corruption, and lack of transparency have compounded the crisis. Over the past decade, protests in Iran have erupted repeatedly over issues ranging from water shortages and rising food prices to political freedoms and women's rights. In most cases, demonstrations were met with heavy security responses, widespread arrests, and strict media control. What makes the current unrest notable is its economic focus. When food prices, currency stability, and basic living standards are threatened, public frustration tends to cut across political and social lines. For many Iranians, the situation has reached a breaking point. Savings have been wiped out by inflation. Imported goods are increasingly unaffordable, and everyday necessities have become luxuries for a growing portion of the population. Despite government assurances, trust remains low. Previous promises of reform and economic stabilization have often failed to materialize, leaving many citizens skeptical of official statements. As protests continue, the international community watches closely. However, global attention remains divided, and Iran's internal situation often receives limited sustained coverage beyond moments of violence. Whether these demonstrations will lead to meaningful change remains unclear. What is evident, however, is that economic pressure has transformed into public unrest once again. When people say their refrigerators are empty, they are not speaking metaphorically, they are describing daily life. And when economic survival is at stake, history shows that unrest rarely fades quietly.